Welcome back, everybody. It's another episode of Freedom, Flexibility, and Finances. I'm your co-host, Chris Angel, here with your host, Peter Weller, and we're catching up, Pete, on our last episode. In this episode, we're going to talk about pause, shift, pivot. Like once we identify who we are and who we're not, like sometimes there are some implications in life and business about pausing what we're doing in order to make a better choice. So what you had this phrase, pause, shift, pivot. Tell me a little bit about that. What does that mean?
So, I'm working through lots of things with my coach, and he talks about pivot. And when you get ready to pivot, to actually give notice. So what happens before we get ready to pivot is we actually shift. And before we shift, we need to pause. A pause is nothing more than a self-reflection of where am I at? Check in with my being that we talked about on the last episode. And in what I'm doing going to lead to what I have? Am I okay becoming the person that this trajectory is leading me on?
Yeah.
And sometimes it doesn't align.
Yeah.
And we have to hit that pause. And when we hit the pause button, what we do is a lot of self-reflection.
Yeah.
We check in with our board of directors, as I like to put it, the people that that you like, that trust, that you can value their opinion, and they're not going to bullshit you. They're going to give it to you exactly how it is. And look at the numbers. I mean, look at your profit and loss. Look at your checkbook balance. Look at the time amount that you're spending with your family. I mean, is what you're doing ultimately leading to the goal and the lifestyle that you want? And if it's not, you have to shift.
So pause on that before we go to shift, because I think sometimes, so just in my own experience of trying to pursue my dreams and my goals, the things I've set out for myself, I don't always know where the line is. Like, how long do I go down the road where I'm like, this isn't giving me what I want? How much of that is just, I'm still working on creating what I want versus this is the abominable.
This is not going the way I want to.
Right. Like, I'm never going to get there. And I'm just kidding myself thinking that I am. Like, how do I distinguish those two things?
Well, there's three parts to this, and the pivot is where we actually move, and the pause is the reflection.
Okay.
So the reflection, at that moment in time, we can look at it and say, do I need to make a shift?
Okay.
Or do I need to stay tight with what's going on because I need to wait for everything to catch up?
Okay.
So in my coaching business, for example, I made some mistakes in real estate, and it cost me a little bit of money.
Yeah.
If I hit pause on a couple of things in my business, my cash flow can catch up. So it doesn't mean that I have to stop coaching.
Right.
It just means that I have to stop and look at it and go, cool, I just need to hang out in this space with a little less expenses. And that's going to be my shift. And when I get to the end of the shift, I don't need to pivot. I can just keep moving forward.
Got it. Okay.
Sometimes that shift means change of direction.
Got it.
And when we make the pivot, we're going to change directions completely on what we're doing. And the shift is the game plan.
Okay. Yeah,
so in other words, we know that we have to keep doing what we're doing to provide for our families, to put the roof over the head, the food in the bellies, to do our shit so that we don't go backwards. And we need to start developing the new skill set so that when we pivot, we don't have a ramp up period, that we can just pivot and keep moving. Experiences in my past, I would quit a job about that fast.
Yep.
And what I didn't leave in there is any time to shift. And so I would be on an upward climb. I would make the shift. Income would drop. When the income drops, the mindset's generally attached to that, and it drags you down to depression. And now you're fighting through climbing out as well as changing your mindset.
Got it.
So the shift is so that you don't lose the mindset or the momentum.
Got it. Yeah, I can see that. I see a lot of people, I mean, if we just put it in the context of lead generation, I see a lot of people, they don't even pause and they don't shift. They just pivot. They're like, I'm going to try this lead generation thing. No, pivot. There's no pause to reflect on, what do I like about that lead generation thing? What don't I like about that lead generation style? What's a good fit for me? What isn't a good fit for me? They just go, there's just a lot of reaction happening. There's a lot of pivoting happening without the first two phases of.
It's like learning how to ride a bike. How many days or weeks or months did it take for you to learn to ride a bike? Most kids had training wheels on there for, at least a season or two.
Yeah.
And then they came off, and then they went back on. They came off, and they went back on.
Right.
Some bloody knees, and next thing you know, you're riding a bike. And then you get a car. You go through the same learning curve.
Right.
Several years later, you pick up a bike and you go, I know I knew how to do this once, yet you're still nervous swinging your leg over the saddle.
Yeah.
And so that's that pause. You know, as we get older, we realize that we need to pause and reflect a little bit more before we actually do things, because it costs money and time.
Yeah.
A lot of times it costs relationships.
Right. Yeah.
And what's the cost? What's the ultimate cost of it?
Yeah.
It's not all about the money.
I think I like, you know, having a topic like pause, shift, pivot. It would be easy. I think what's important in the conversation is to look at the cost, because when you don't appreciate the cost, then you don't really appreciate pause, shift, pivot. You're like, oh, I'll just figure it out. It's no big deal. But I think some of the cost is relationship, like you said. Some of it is financial cost. But when you don't pause and start to assess and ask the right questions, you just pivot all the time. You react all the time. Actually, pivot, even the word implies intention. And I think sometimes it's not even intention with people. They're not pivoting. They're just reacting, you know?
The reaction. And I would rather pivot, and I would rather give notice that I'm going to make a pivot.
Yeah.
So that I lose less relationships. The people that matter the most are the ones that get hurt the worst during a pivot. And if you don't give notice during a pivot, people get hurt. And it's not a numbers game. Yes, people are replaceable, but when are we going to stop looking at it as a society? I love the Three Musketeers on this one for all and all for one. Well, you can't be the Three Musketeers, or you can't be part of the Musketeers if you make a pivot without giving notice.
Sure. It's good. Yeah. I think it's people, one of the things that challenges people, I think, to make that pivot, they might pause and reflect. They might even start doing some things to shift, but it's really, sometimes it becomes hard to pivot because we're afraid of what other people will say, what other people will think. Like, for example, I heard Seth Godin did a podcast a couple of weeks ago called Sunken Costs. And it was like, you know, like people are like, well, I have too much time invested. Like if I change careers again, my whole family will think I'm an idiot and I'll be right. Or if I do it again, if I change companies again, here's a good one. If I change companies again, my client base, my sphere of influence will think I'm flaky. And so then we don't pivot to what we feel would be the right move because we're afraid of the, you know,
sunken cost bias. Our generations way before would always say, when is it time to cut bait? You know, and when you cut bait, you're cutting off line, you're having to restring the reel. You know, it's a fishing analogy, so you have to cut bait. So cut the bait, which means all of your line goes out.
Right.
Your bait on the end, the hooks, all the hardware. Right. You're just going to lose it and say, next.
Right.
So you have to restring that reel. It takes time to restring the reel, to put new hardware on, to put new bait and get fishing. Yet, what does that really mean when we look at the grand scheme of things? Sometimes it's best to cut bait or get rid of that sunk cost bias.
Yeah.
You know, it's cost me X amount of dollars. Well, if you keep going, isn't it going to cost you more?
Right. Yeah.
I mean, when does the profit show up?
Yeah.
And that's the biggest thing that happened in my real estate business is when I realized that I could make a pivot, spend very little bit of money going out, actually do less deals, spend less time doing real estate and make more money and provide a higher quality of service. Really, it made the most sense to me to be able to do that.
Yeah.
And when I made that pivot, there's some people on my real estate team that it was going to affect.
Right.
I gave notice and then I set them up and I made sure that they were good to go. And are they doing better now than they were on my team? Yeah. Don't wait too long to make a pivot if you know it's time to pivot.
Yeah.
That's our worst enemy, is letting it go longer than it should have.
Yeah. So good. I think it happens all the time. Listen, not to get too personal with those of you listening, but I mean, that stuff doesn't just apply to business. That applies to relationships. How many people don't pivot in a relationship soon enough and they just kind of like suck it up and, you know, turns into some codependent thing or, you know, I mean, there's a lot of, analogy.
You know, that other saying of it's nothing personal, it's all business.
Yeah.
Well, between that and lead with revenue, I'm calling bullshit on both of them. Lead with profit.
Mm.
Pause, shift, pivot. Pause. Make sure you're taken care of in the process of it. Make sure that you're taking care of people in the process of it, because every decision we make affects everybody else. Nothing changes and everything changes. We're all in this together. We're all the three musketeers, or all the musketeers. So let's create the win-win. Let's figure out where that lies, and let's stop looking at people as numbers and replaceable.
Mm-hmm. Good stuff. Well, in our next episode, we're going to talk about how to live from our foundation. I think once you pivot, there's a lot of things that come up, like guiding principles, things that help you make decisions faster because you're operating from a center, you're operating from the core of who you are, which we can call your foundation. And so in the next episode, we'll talk about how to live from your foundation. But if people want to reach out to you now, Pete, maybe they're in a space where they're wanting to talk through their pause or what they need to do in a shift, or what do we pivot to? Maybe it's with their business, or maybe they want to change companies. Maybe they're at a company and they're like, dude, I've been thinking about changing companies for a while. Can I talk that through with you? Where can people go?
Absolutely. Conversations are always free with me for the first couple. I've got a gift. I want to share it with the world. Mm-hmm. And a lot of times it's just asking questions that cause you to realize the answers. I believe that everybody has the answer on the inside of them. So all I want to do is facilitate that with you. You can go to www.kindalikepete.com, schedule a 30 or 60-minute call, whichever one you think is more prudent. Mm-hmm. Boy, that's an old word that came out somewhere. But www.kindalikepete.com.
Yeah.
And love to chat with anybody that's willing to take 30 to 60 minutes, and let's just have a good conversation.
Awesome. Sounds good, Pete. Thanks again for a great episode. And we'll catch you in the next one where we talk about how to live from your foundation. See ya.
Absolutely.